Good morning everybody. Welcome to Gyan Manch. Today I am going to discuss a new theory and that is Gynocentrism. Look at the slide. Gynocentrism. When we think about Gynocentrism, the first question that comes in our mind is what is Gynocentrism? If we try to explain this term in the simplest language, then the meaning of Gynocentrism is, look at the slide. Gynocentrism is one of the many shades of feminism. It means Gynocentrism is a part of feminism, but there is some difference between feminism and Gynocentrism that we shall discuss it later on. If we think about Gynocentrism, first of all we have to look at the whole history of women's writing. We have to think about the movements of feminist criticism, and then we can find out where feminist criticism or where Gynocentrism is there in the whole history of feminist criticism. Next slide please. If we think about the history of women's writing or the feminist movement, we can say that the feminist movement started during 1960s and 1970s. When we think about feminist movement, again the question raises, what is feminist movement? Slide please. Feminist criticism is a critique of the patriarchal mode of thinking. So in feminist criticism, patriarchal mode of thinking is very much important. What patriarchal culture, what man-made culture thinks about woman is described in feminist criticism. So once again I say, feminist criticism is a critique of the patriarchal mode of thinking. Slide please. Now what feminist criticism do? Then feminist criticism tries to find out subordinate position of women at various levels, for example familial, religious, political, economic, social, legal and artistic domains. These are the areas from which the feminist critics try to find out the suppressed or oppressed or marginalized position of women, how patriarchy highlights, how patriarchy reflects the condition of women, how patriarchy find out the subordinate position of women in all these areas are reflected in feminist criticism. Slide please. It also discusses gender problem, which is the pivotal point in the history of feminist criticism. Now these 2 points, gender problems and the subordinate position of women, these two things are very much important to understand the whole history of feminist criticism. And in order to remove these two problems, the problem of gender and the another is subordinate position of women, various women's liberation movements started. Slide please. Women's liberation movement started during 1960s by those women who were politically committed, were active participants in the civil rights movement, and they were also active in the protest actions against various wars in Vietnam, and also those women who belonged to various groups. All these women join together and then they fight against patriarchal culture. Slide please. One of the leading feminist writers is Frieden. She is the author of The Feminine Mystic. Betty Frieden founded the National Organization of Women. In short, we can say NOW. Now, in Feminine Mystic, Betty Frieden wrote about the situation of women, the pathetic condition of women. She founded National Organization of Women so that she could voice the grievances and fight for the rights of women. In Feminine Mystic, Betty Frieden surveyed the condition of women, especially of housewives and mothers, and tried to find out that in the patriarchal culture, women are happy with their traditional image, but Betty Friedan wanted to remove this traditional image or the traditional or media image, and so she insisted that women at least should learn to raise voice. Women at least should learn to ask questions, and in this way Betty Friedan gave us the new concept, and the new concept is new equality. Look at the next slide. So Betty Friedan gave us the concept of new equality. I have some pictures, and look at these pictures so that from these pictures you can understand how women were fighting for their rights. These pictures, please. This is the picture of the March of Women. Look how women fight for their votes. Next picture. Yes, this is the picture of Betty Friedan. You can see the image of Betty Friedan, and here how women join together and fight for their rights. And the next picture. This is one more picture that how women fight for their rights. Okay. So Betty Friedan gave us the new equality. One more feminist writer, and that is, slide please. Next slide. Kate Millett. Kate Millett came in the 20th century. She wrote Sexual Politics. Now in Sexual Politics, Kate Millett graphically described the sense of insecurity among women, and she said that women were so much exploited, they were so much intolerable condition that at last they denied for their existence. Next slide. During 1960s there came a U-turn. Up till now, the earlier feminists were specially concerned with social and political changes, but now present feminists, they were concerned with academic institutions. They became convinced that literature and literary criticism were powerful cultural weapons in the hands of male hegemony. Once again I am repeating, up till now, that means the earlier feminists were mainly concerned with social and political changes, but from 1960s, the present feminists, they were concerned with academic institutions. New slide. Now here, few women started to express their feelings and emotions, their ideas, their experiences into words. But they were only at the personal levels. They were not published articles, they were not published literature. Whatever they wrote only by using the language created by man. Perhaps it was believed that the language or the experiences of men were worth writing and women's were not. It was also believed that the position of women or the condition of women were confined only to the four walls of the house. So women did not have right to speak or write. Only a few women wrote under the language of man, and she made herself an honorary man, as in the case of George Eliot. But if she wrote on the foreground of emotions, naturally she would be forgotten. So the female writers started to write under the title of male pseudonyms. Pseudonyms means they have taken the title of the male writer's name and then they have published females' experiences under male pseudonyms. Now why they have written their books under male pseudonyms? Because they wanted to express womanly experiences, they wanted fair treatment in the patriarchal culture, they wanted to be visible, they wanted to be express themselves in the patriarchal society, and so that's why they have used male pseudonyms in their books. Next slide please. Now this is the list of some of the female writers who had acquired male pseudonyms, and these are Mrs. Pearl Greggy, Catherine Harris Bradley, her niece Edith Emma Cooper, George Eliot, Jane Austen, and the brothers and the Brontes. These are the women writers who wrote under male pseudonyms. But here there is one limitations, because all these women writers wrote with the language of man, because norms and rules of language are created by men writers. So, slide please. They could not experiment with style and technique. Women followed only the language created by men. So they did not have right. They did not have right to express their experiences by using different style and technique, and this is the limitation that feminist writers followed. Next slide. One of the leading feminists is Mary Wollstonecraft. The book written by her is The Vindication of the Rights of Women, and in that book she highlighted inequality. Now, inequality between man and women in the patriarchal society, and so she demanded fair treatment, she demanded equal opportunities between men and women in that book, The Vindication of the Rights of Women, written by Mary Wollstonecraft. Next slide. Mary Wollstonecraft is one of the first English women writer who wrote eloquently and angrily about the rights of women. Slide please. Another important writer, Virginia Woolf. Her book, A Room of One's Own, proves a landmark in the history of feminist criticism. We can also call it the Bible of feminism. Now, in A Rooms of One's Own, Virginia Woolf talks about two conditions of women, and the first one is a room of one's own, and the second one is an economic independence of one's own. So, she insisted that women should at least have two things. The first thing is privacy, and the second one is economic independence. And she believed that if woman has economic independence and privacy, then she can independently think and write what she desired. Next slide. You can also see the image of Virginia Woolf here. Next slide. The second writer is Simone de Beauvoir. The book written by her is The Second Sex. In The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir asked various questions. Who is a woman? How she is constructed in the patriarchal culture? How she is constructed differently from the patriarchal culture? All these questions are raised by Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex. Next slide. In this book, she hit hard at the androcentric customs and conventions, art and culture, philosophy and religion. Now here you have to understand the term androcentric. What is androcentric? Androcentric means man-made culture or the patriarchal culture, or that culture in which we can see the domination of man is called the androcentric culture. So Simone de Beauvoir in that books hit hard at the androcentric customs and conventions, art and culture, philosophy and religion. Next slide. The statement given by Simone de Beauvoir is very important to understand the situation of women in the feminist criticism. And the statement given by Simone de Beauvoir is, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. This is very much important to understand women's condition in the man-made culture. Because woman is not born as a woman, but she is forced to behave like a woman in the patriarchal culture. Woman is not inferior by birth, but she is inferiorized by the culture. She is inferiorized by the patriarchal society, and so she has to behave like a woman in the patriarchal society. So this statement is a milestone in the history of feminist criticism. Next slide, please. Now the whole feminist movement, if we look at the feminist movement from starting to the present time, we can divide the whole feminist criticism, whole feminist movement into three major stages. The first is, slide please. The first stage is the imitative phase. we can call it the feminist phase. Now remember the title of these three phases. The title of the first phase is feminist phase, and the period included in this phase is 1840 to 1880. Once again, this is the feminist phase. The first phase is the feminist phase. Period included in this era is 1840 to 1880. Now, which are the characteristics of the first phase of the feminist movement? Slide please. It concerned with equality. This is the first characteristic. The feminist movement of the first stage gives importance to equality between men and women, and the writers included in the first phase are Mary Wollstonecraft and Simone de Beauvoir. New slide. The first stage imitated male writers. As I had already told that women writers could not experiment with styles and techniques because they only imitated the language written by male writers. So in the first stage, it is the stage of equality. In this stage, they only imitated the language of male writers. Next characteristic of the first stage is it portrayed women happily performing domestic duties, aspiring for marriage, and to look beautiful. These are the characteristics of first stage of feminist movement. Slide please. Now this is the second stage. In the first stage, it is called the feminist phase. Remember that equality is important. Now in the second stage, it is called the phase of rebellion, or it is also called the phase of revolt. And the title of the second phase is feminist phase. The first phase, feminine phase. The second is feminist phase, and the period included in this phase is 1880 to 1920. Kat Millett, Ellen Showalter, and Betty Frieden, these are the writers who revolted against patriarchal culture. So they were included in the second stage of the feminist criticism. Once again, I am repeating, the second stage is the stage of feminist phase, and it gives importance to rebelliousness and revolt. Slide please. This is very important. The second stage represents the protest against the standards and values of the male culture. In the first stage, they only imitated the standards and values created by male culture. Now here in the second stage, they revolted against these standards, they revolted against the values, they revolted against the norms created by patriarchy. So naturally, anger, anguish against man and culture. So anger and anguish is not only found against man, but it is also against the whole dominant culture. So these are the characteristics of the second stage. Slide please. So there is an outburst of repressed women's writing, and so they rejected the roles given by patriarchy. Patriarchal culture has given the role of an ideal woman, a loving mother, a traditional woman. In the second stage, the feminist writers revolted against this stage. They revolted against the media image or the traditional image of an ideal woman. And this is the second stage. Next slide. They break the established social and cultural values. Sometimes they even refused to fit into the shape created by man. Slide please. And at